thank you very much for coming and sitting and talking with me and letting somebody else ask the questions for a change. So, first of all...
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, and I would do anything for you, Norma.
So, I think there's a whole history about you that most people don't know. And I remember you way long time ago.
Yeah, long time ago.
So, what city did you grow up in?
Brooklyn.
Oh, there you go. I thought I knew everything.
I was Brooklyn Mill Basin. Mm-hmm. Way down south near the King's Plaza Shopping Center. That's where I grew up. And went to work with my dad every chance I got in the city. Because he worked in the garment center. And that was how I kind of fell in love with the business.
Very interesting. And what were your majors in school?
Well, in high school, I went to Madison High School, and I studied fashion design there. And I won the medal. And everybody thought I would go to school to study fashion after that. And my dad said no. He said, fashion's in your blood. That'll happen later. Go get a liberal arts education. Right. And so I went to school in Buffalo because it was a state school, at the time still is, SUNY, and was at that time one of the most political, really very, very good schools. And my sister was at Pratt already, so I was going to save them some money. I was a good kid. And I studied fine arts and graphics and communication design because I figured that would be a better ticket to get a job when I got out of school than studying painting and sculpture.
Mm-hmm. And so when you got out of school, then?
When I got out of school, I won a contest in my last year with Mademoiselle magazine.
Oh, wow.
And in our era, Mademoiselle was the best magazine with the very best people. It was a fabulous magazine. And I was one of the guest editors, which was a big competition that they would have every year.
Yeah.
And I followed in the footsteps of people like Allie McGraw and Betsy Johnson and Sylvia Plath. And I was one of the 20 in my year. And after that guest editorship, which was a month in June, where I tell people if that existed today, it would be a reality TV show.
Yeah.
20 students picked from around the country, living in some house, trying to get the job with a boyfriend, and But it was a remarkable program. But in any case, I then was the only one in my group of 20 asked to stay on with a permanent job.
Wow!
So I started my career at Condé Nast at Mademoiselle. Spent 6-7 years there.
I had no idea. That is really amazing. So at Mademoiselle, what do you think was the biggest learning experience for you? What do you think that...
That's a good question.
What was it like? What set the base for you to be who you are now?
Well, Mademoiselle, was the smarter of the magazines they had at Condé Nast. But it was a real eye-opener going to work in that company. And I'll never forget going to HR about asking for a raise because, I was probably making $80 a week, which was what we were all making then.
That's right. I was making $80 a week, too, at the airlines.
Yeah.
That was
Could you believe
big ticket.
$80 a week?
No, it's hard.
And shared an apartment with 3 other people. But I remember going to HR and talking about it, because those magazines at that time also had very many trust fund kids there who didn't need $80 a week.
Right.
And asking about a raise, and by the time you walked out of there, you were like, thank you so much. It is a privilege working here. I absolutely appreciate, not a dime more.
Right.
It was like, take advantage of the perks, the this, the that, all the advantages here. What a privilege it is to be here. And, you walked out with you like so embarrassed that you had the nerve to ask for more money to survive. But I met so many interesting people there, and people were so smart, and it was a real work ethic that I find very different today. But I also learned that I had some value, and my last year there, or 2 years, I moved from the college competitions there. I was in merchandising. So I traveled to every department store in America, which was a great experience. Doing those in-store events with bringing a magazine edition to life. You know, whether it was exercise with Nick Kanofsky, you know, the Romanian gymnast.
Yes, of course.
You know, and I'd be talking about the body fashions, and he'd be, you know, leaning on his arm and lifting his body up. And, you know, it was really fun. And we did makeovers in the stores. And so I really learned a lot about being in the trenches.
Yeah.
And when you went to every store in the country that had a name and a personality, like Higbee's and Burdines, and stores that are all now Macy's.
Yeah.
You know, Marshall Field. I mean, they're all gone. But I learned a lot, met a lot of interesting people, you know, did road shows where we did these makeovers with Maury Hobson and makeup artists and people. It was fun. I had such a good time. But I left the magazine because I had a boss who was competitive and jealous, and she knew that I was and I said, it's never going to happen here. You know, she's just not going to let me do it. And I won't mention her name because she's was well known in the industry.
I'm sure.
So off the record, I'll tell you later. But it was a great first job.
Yeah.
No question.
And your motivation, so much of what people ask, young people especially, is like, how did you do it? What did you do? None of that is in a book. It's your desire to just do it and be in the trenches and the excitement of what each day is going to bring. And
Absolutely.
No matter what you do, I mean, you almost create the life you want to have. And you are
without realizing
perfect.
it.
You are the example of that. You've not only created the life you want to have, you've created the life the fashion industry wanted to have. And it really, you know, there is no one else that can take credit for that. Absolutely no one else. You gave the American fashion industry an identity, and it is just unbelievable to think about what was before and that you had the vision for that. I just remember thinking, oh, how does she get the nerve to do this? Like, you have to really, first of all the egos and everything else.
Yeah, there were a few of those.
But before we get there, between creating something that didn't exist, having the vision, but even more so having the fortitude to do that, from that job to that vision, what were you doing? What was sort of the
pathway through it?
Yeah.
I was always just intrigued by talent and good design, and for me, it's all about a lifestyle. It's all very interconnected. And so when I left my Mademoiselle job, I think the next thing I did was I went to work at Gimbel's East.
Oh my God.
Remember Gimbel's East?
Yes.
Or remember Gimbel's?
Gimbel's.
You know, when I talk about my
What
career
is
in
Gimbel's?
places,
Right.
I go, you know, by the fourth or fifth job, I go, that doesn't exist either. So if anybody's still with me, remember any of these places? Gimbel's had opened a new store on 86th Street, Lexington Avenue, which was to cater to the Upper East Side clientele.
Yes.
Because downtown was Macy's and Gimbel's. And you have to go watch those Christmas movies to
understand
them.
Yeah.
And that was very promotional, but I loved it. I was the fashion director at Gimbel's. And I remember having my Diana Vreeland red office with all this like wicker furniture and in a tiny place, but it was so chic, that little tiny office. But I was responsible for windows, for ads, for merchandising some of the better shops. So that's when I really got into the market and went to the shows that were all over wherever they were. And but I love doing the windows. I love doing all the in-store events. I hired George Stavrinos. Remember George to do ads?
Of course I did.
Larry Laszlo was doing illustrations for me.
Oh
I mean, these are all people that nobody knew them at the time.
Yeah.
And they were all my pals. And it was so nice to, we had our own identity for everything.
Yeah.
And I loved that job until Gimbel's was bought by, Gimbel Sachs was bought by some other big, chain and whatever. And they said, okay, now we need to merchandise everything in the store by color code. And why don't you come down to 33rd Street? And I said, there's a fashion office there, really? And that was not going to work. And I did have a short stint in my life on 7th Avenue, on the other side of the fence, for a company called Cinnamon Wear. And Cinnamon was one of those lines that was at Bendel's, the good old days of Bendel's. And it was Madras. It was every color Madras.
You're kidding.
And they just hardly changed the collection every season. But I was now on the other side of the fence, having to do, like, not really sales, but promotion, whatever. And I hated it.
Really?
And I was in 1412 Broadway, in fact, where I then came back years later at CFDA's office. But I also learned something very important at that time, because they were not the nicest people that I was working for, and I was fired, and it was Christmas. And I remember being in the building, and everybody was walking in with trays of candies and cookies and Christmas parties and all this stuff. And I was like, I was the most depressed, and I thought, if I ever am in a position of authority, I will never fire somebody around this time of the year, because it's just wrong, just wrong. And you learn those things, from all these experiences. And then I eventually opened up my own PR firm. Ask me what I knew about PR.
What year was that?
It was like 1978 or something. Yeah, it must have been around there. And I went to work with friends of mine who were architects and interior designers, who you knew, Scott Bromley and Robin Jacobson. And they had an office on 59th Street by the bridge, shared office space with a textile designer named Gretchen Bellinger, had half the floor, they had the other half. And they gave me a desk, which was, as big as the area we're sitting in. And one of the big projects they were working on at the time was Studio 54. So they were designing a studio.
Yes.
And, so it was a heady time being in their office with them.
Right.
It was, we didn't know what studio would become.
Yeah.
But it was a remarkable time to have lived through. And to go to studio with Scott, who was tall and handsome and, come on, I was a pipsqueak, nobody, now I can go to parties and people go get her in. Back then I wish I was that person. But it was the most extraordinary time in my life. And I started working with fashion clients that I knew. My first client was Selma Weiser for Charivari.
Really?
And she had the boutiques just on Broadway and wanted to do little openings with wine to get some people in. Yeah. And that was pretty fabulous. And then it shifted because of being in Robin and Scott's office to doing interior firms and textile companies. And I had, a couple of little intern-type assistants that helped. And I didn't know what I was doing. It was common sense to me. Yeah. It was about connecting this one with that. Connect is like the middle name. And I always thought I had 411 on my forehead, because people would, where do I get this? How do I get balloons? I want to do a party. Somebody just designed this. How do they get published? I'm like, what am I, 411? And then I realized I could get paid for that information and just connecting the dots. And one of my first assistants was Jane Hertzmark, who's Jane Hertzmark Hudis now, who's worldwide global group president at Estee Lauder. And she worked for me for 6 years, and all sorts of fabulous people worked for me through my life. And my clients were, like I said, architects, interior designers, and then I wound up representing this design center in Long Island City, the IDCNY, which was being built to house all the showrooms. Yeah. And we had, Richard Meyer designed showrooms, and Mario Botta and Michael Graves. It was that heady day of those architects.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
The architects ran it. It wasn't fashion designers.
No, it was all about architects.
And that's when I was doing that. So I felt like, wow, these guys are so great. All of them. Yeah. And Massimo Vignelli and Layla were my mentors. They did all the graphics for the building. I adored them more than anybody, and learned so much from all of those people. Ian Pei was the master planner. You know,
Oh my God.
it was fantastic, and I loved that
Yeah.
job more than anything. I go across the bridge every day to Long Island City to work, and we were in old chiclet factories and bakery factories and renovated them. Charlie Guathme Siegel. Charlie was the main architect on the project.
Wow.
And so I loved that, and it was a very, very exciting time doing parties, and me and my assistants, I mean, we would cut up, you know, invitations and confetti and, you know, sprinkle things on the pathways when there were parties, figuring out ways to bring all these people together to Queens.
Yeah.
You know, and to not go to the airport and not go home. You're going to working.
Yeah.
Because New York is one of the only cities that does have all these waterways, but you don't cross them all day, like Paris or London or anywhere else. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But that was such an exciting job for quite a few years until the recession hit, which was the late 80s, 90, and people stopped buying, you know, furniture for office buildings that stopped being built. And the contract furniture industry just went boing.
Yeah.
Leasing stopped. We leased 700,000 feet of a 1 million square foot project of 3 buildings. And in fact, the 4th building, which was their garage, I did an event while I was still at the IDC where Ray Kawakubo did the first fashion show in New York in that garage.
Really?
Did it with Marion Greenberg and the whole team.
Wow.
And we did a big warehouse sale in that space. And, you know, it was an amazing time. And it was also, you know, the AIDS crisis was in full swing now. So we got very involved in that universe. And
you know, we should really talk about that because you and I really lost some very
with
good
the same
friends.
people.
And I mean, I even just starting to talk about it, I get teary, and it's so.
And Bob and
it to me, there was something about that time that was not just tragic, but it changed the city in such a major way. And I really think there was a creative energy in New York that nobody can understand. It was everywhere. Everywhere. There wasn't, forget about the windows and the displays and the art and the everything.
Theater.
Everything. It was just hyper creative. And then a switch. There was one switch. And just this sort of very common thing happened that you were so aware of, and it's like to adapt, to try to tolerate it has been a struggle of mine ever since. And the loss of people who came to New York because they were creative and different into a world of people who were here who were creative and different made New York such an incredible place. And I miss that about that time.
That, of course.
Besides the fun and I can't ever remember laughing as much either. Think about it.
Laughing as much with you and me and Billy Bernardo and Bob, whoever, and with a flat tire coming home from a party in New Jersey or somewhere.
Right.
I think we laughed.
We laughed all the time. I just remember laughing all the time. And I think about Bob Curry all the time.
Yeah, you just want to say, Bob, what would you do now? How should we do this?
Or just his take on it. He was so great. I mean, beyond creative. But what's your take on that time? I mean, I know you were fully immersed in the same kind of world I was in. What's your view of it? For people who have no real idea of what happened.
Yeah, you know, the definitive story on it doesn't feel like it's ever been told. No matter how much, you know, Kushner's writes and Larry Kramer writes, and you know, it was such a personal experience. And like you say, it was fun. The creativity was boundless. I mean, anything was possible. And that was, long before gay rights and, same-sex marriages.
Women's
those
rights,
things were not even a twinkle in anybody's eye. And part of what those guys were doing, which was because they were so ostracized on one hand. I mean, they were like, fuck you, I'm going to just be so creative that you can't dismiss me.
Right. That's right.
From Michael Bennett's plays to, how many times did we see chorus line? And that told the story the same way. Robin and my friends and the designers and from Perry Ellis to Clovis Ruffin and,
Antonio
Lopez, everybody, and it was the studio days. That was right before, studio happened right before that first bunch of people were all of a sudden getting sick on Fire Island. And I remember the first friend who, I think they said he had cat scratch fever. We're like, what the hell is cat scratch fever? And then as that played out, we were going to everybody whenever people died at the beginning, we had big parties and big memorials. And then it became, we can't do this anymore because you're doing them several times a week. People were being exhausted from going to memorial services and going to hospitals. But we lost so much talent. And I don't care how creative everybody is now. It's just it's not the same.
No,
there was an exuberance.
The numbers of it, and it was sort of like a cycle. One inspiration created another inspiration, and
everybody fed off each other.
And you would talk about it and get excited about it. So, and nobody was competitive.
It was like the first time you saw certain things.
And it was the first time for so much. And the spirit of creativity was really at its peak. And I think even in the fashion industry, I think it was a super hyper creative time. I think in every part of our lives. But there was such a positive energy that people were laughing so much and having a good time that it was so much fun, and you were expressing yourself that I just know that we haven't seen that again.
No.
In any magnitude, we have not seen that again. No.
Not even close.
And that, and why it ended that way, I don't know, and it's very hard to figure out. It had the same impact on me that 9/11 had, where things are not ever going to be the same.
Another experience that you and I shared.
Yes, it's so
remarkably
true. That's so true. We bumped into each other at St. Patrick's, and we shared a very moving experience. And I don't know why I was drawn to St. Patrick's, but a lot of people were. And when I saw you there, I thought, how funny.
I know, I'm a nice Jewish girl. What was I doing going over to St. Patrick's?
But it was a great experience, and I'm so glad we shared it together.
It was the moment when you were really liking Rudy Giuliani. We were like, yay, Rudy. Now it's like, get the hell out.
It was a powerful...
It was a very
powerful,
extraordinary times.
And as New Yorkers, we really were, we've experienced New York intensely, I have to say. Yeah, we really have. And fortunately, because there is no other city that you can have this type of dynamic and intensity. So tell me what was going on in your head. What was just before you decided, this is it, I'm going to change this industry and fix it right for New York City? Other than the fact that you should be mayor.
Thank God, no. It was people who follow my career when I talk about it. I never had a 5-year plan or a 2-year plan, or I never said, okay, I have to do this. I'm going to make this much money and then I'm going to go there, and this is where I see myself at 30, and this is where I see my, it was having fun. It was trying to enjoy what I was doing, trying to just do the best I could do at whatever it was I was doing. And not because I'm competitive. I just want to do a good job.
Right.
And, and I guess like everybody else, you want to be liked and appreciated along the way. But when I was at this design center with all these architects and everybody, and the recession hit, it was this second time in my life that I was let go from a job. And I was senior VP marketing advertising. And it's truly, again, one of those things where I say, this is when you don't fire the creative people. This is when you fire the other idiots on the team. This is when you need creative people to reinvent something, come up with some new ideas. But, the boys won out, and I left. And so I went back to my PR roots for a little bit, freelancing for some work, and had my 3-wheel Rolodex, which was a real sign of you were powerful.
Do you think
3
anybody
wheels.
knows what that is anymore? A 3-wheel
Rolodex. I think I still have it in my garage of my country house. And I was working in doing some PR. And one of the fun clients that I actually helped in this office for was Pantone, the color company. And I remember creating a color day for them at Cooper Hewitt Museum. And we did architecture and color and had a panel of architects, interiors and color, fashion and color, and food and color. And it was such a fun day. And capped off the day with a cocktail party at the end of the day. And I had the caterers do every single thing was dyed into different colors. So you were having little sandwiches, which the bread was green and the cheese inside was blue or something. And then you'd had like bowls of like different berries. The other foods are really rich, beautiful colors. But it was so fun because people were freaking out. They were afraid to taste these things because the colors had such a perception of, I can eat that. But it was interesting. It was so much fun. But in any case, while I was at that job, I read Woman's Wear daily, which I read since high school. My dad would bring it home from work every day.
Oh, wow.
So, I always knew what was going on. And I kept reading these stories about, the CFDA looking for a new director. But actually, just while I was at this job, I went to backtrack a second, to 7th on Sale, the big AIDS benefit that CFDA finally had done. And at that time, I was on the board of DIFA, Design Industries Foundation Fighting AIDS, because we in the interior furnishings design industry were really the first people to rise to the occasion and take on doing something. And because we had a president that wouldn't mention AIDS, we had a New York Times that didn't write about AIDS.
Really? I didn't know.
We didn't have, there was nothing, and friends were dying. So Larry Pond, who was in the industry, and Pat Green started DIFA, and I was on the founding board, and we all got together to raise money. And at that time, you had to do really crazy events and fun events to get normal people to come and spend money for a disease about sexually transmitted disease of gay men. Wasn't a pretty subject to raise money for. But we were so, again, it's that creativity of that group. Suzanne Barsh doing love balls, stuff that we did was just incredible. I did an event called Edible Architecture and had all the architects and designers give me drawings, which I had every one of them beautifully framed, free from every framer in New York, and then went to cake bakers and specialty food stylists, long before there was a food channel and baking shows, finding people to execute all of those in 3-dimension. We sold everything at Sotheby's after a week's display in a showroom.
It was great. What
it was
a brilliant
like Candyland.
idea.
It was so gorgeous. Raised over $500,000, was a ton of money at the time. We did unbelievable events because prior to that, fundraising for a disease was a theater benefit.
Yeah, it was very different.
That's it.
Yeah.
You didn't do anything. AIDS changed all of that.
Yeah, that's true.
AIDS was the forerunner for creating fun, fabulous events to raise money. And AIDS was a big forerunner to the breast cancer community coming out of the closet to talk about it and raise money. So I had met with the CFDA folks as part of a DIFA team. We went to the CFDA and said, could we do something together and get the fashion industry to do something, something big? Calvin had done one or two events, but there was really no big unified effort. And I remember sitting in Carolyn Rum's showroom with a few of the DIFA folks and some other people at CFDA, and then they said, no, thank you, we're going to do our own thing. They really wanted to do their own thing. And they came up with 7th on Sale, which was a brilliant event. And I went to the dessert party because that's all I could afford. And it was Anna Winter, and it was Calvin, Donna, Ralph, I think were the chairs, maybe Oscar, I don't remember. And Robert Isabel designed the entire place. It was magic. The Armory on 26th Street. They raised $5 million after. It was a weekend of shopping. 2-hour spells. You buy a ticket to go in and shop, buy everything. Every designer, you were there. Everybody had their own booth selling their stuff. It was like you died and went to heaven. A designer wholesale meeting all these people. But that event killed the organization. CFDA was depleted after that. Nobody knew what to do. Carolyn Rome resigned. The young man who was an executive director who had an office about the size of the elevator, his contract wasn't renewed. I knew him years ago from the furniture industry. And so that's when I was reading Women's Wear, and the CFDA was looking for a new director now to take all this energy that they finally galvanized with the AIDS for AIDS to get somebody there. And I said, maybe I should throw my hat in the ring, and it was over months of reading this actually. And people said to me that I was working, Mary Loving in the office said, God, you're perfect for this. Why didn't we think of that? Let me find out who to call. Why don't you call Donna Karen? And I said, Donna's going to take my call. She doesn't know me. So then she said, Stan Herman and Monica Tilley were the search committee. Send a resume and a letter. And I did on Friday. It took me all day to get this letter out. And Monday morning they called and said, how quickly can you get here? And I went to meet them.
Really?
And they said they had just picked their 5 finalists who were coming in on Wednesday. This was a Monday. They were coming in on, maybe I saw them on Monday, Tuesday. It was later that week was the final selection. So my timing was like right under the gun. And clearly with my experience in PR and marketing and organizing in industry, which I had done for the design industry, the architecture world, I said, I could organize the fashion industry. Why not? But so that's how that came about. And then they loved me. And I said to Stan, I said, I met you. And he goes, I said, when I was a guest editor at Mademoiselle, we all would go off. There were 20 of us, so there were 5 groups of 4. And we'd all go to meet someone. This group would meet a poet. This group would meet a designer. This group would meet, somebody else in industry focus. And Stan was the designer at Mr. Mort, who we went to meet.
I remember.
And so when I told him that, he goes, I knew you. I said, oh, you're just lying, but that's okay.
No, he would remember.
He doesn't
He's
remember
so quirky.
anything.
He would remember. He does.
I work with, he's my best friend to this day, but we teased about that all the time. And so anyway, I went for the next meeting with the finalists, and the meeting was with Stan. No, maybe was Stan and Monica there? I don't remember. It was Bill Blass, Carolyn Rome, and Calvin. And I knew Calvin from the beach and from parties, and Bill Blass looked like my father, so I was kind of comfortable with him, but he was such a class act.
Yeah, he was.
And Carolyn was wonderful, and and they said to me, asked me questions like, why should we hire you? You haven't been in fashion in 10 years. You've been in other...
Right.
I said, I never stopped wearing clothes. And they went, oh, that's a good answer. I said, I never stopped shopping. I never stopped looking at magazines. I said, that's in my blood. And I really do believe that.
Yeah.
And we talked about a lot of things, and they clearly said, we want you to meet the board. I was selected, but I had to go before the entire board. And that was like a couple of weeks later, and it was my day of my birthday.
You're kidding.
And I remember the most stress in my life was dressing for each of these meetings. What do you wear to these things? But the meeting was in Carolyn Rum's showroom, long conference table. And it was Calvin, Ralph, Donna, Bill Blass, Oscar, Mary McFadden, Patricia Underwood, Monica Tilley, Marion Resteve, everybody who was Casper, the whole board, including Eleanor Lampert and
you're kidding.
others, because she was like founding creator of sorts. And it was a tough meeting. They really threw out a lot of questions back and forth to me, especially Oscar, who was, how could you raise enough money for us if you're going to be working for, you're involved with DIFA and we need all your attention. I said, you'll get 1,000% of my time, but don't ask me to stop doing something for my friends. Or if people I know are dying, don't ask me to not continue to do that. I mean, nothing will stop that. And I looked at him like, And then Mary McFadden said, you're on the, you created this Furnish a Future. You're working with the Partnership for the Homeless. I mean, how's that going to take your time? And I said, it's interesting that you asked that, because I only went to a meeting about that because it was in your showroom. And I wanted to see your showroom. And I said, when I was there, I realized, oh my gosh, I know I could do something with this. And we created a whole new division for the Partnership for the Homeless.
Wow.
So anyway, long story short, please go out of the room. And they deliberated. I came back in, and they all sang happy birthday to me.
Stop. How cool.
And actually had a cake.
Oh my God, that is so fabulous.
And that's how it started. And then it was Market Week. I started 2 weeks later, but in that time, Michael Kors had a show in an empty loft in 20-something Street, Chelsea. You know how loud the music is at a fashion show. If something's not nailed down, they put the music on and the ceiling started to crumble. Came down and Cindy, Linda, Naomi, all the supermodels of the day.
Yeah.
But when plaster landed in Susie Menkes' lap and Carrie Donovan's lap,
that was
it. The headlines the next day said, we live for fashion, we don't want to die for it.
I remember.
And I said, I think my job description just changed.
Yeah.
And that's how 7th on 6th was created. And it was named after 7th on Sale. So it was 7th Avenue moving to 6th Avenue. And 2 years later, we tried an experiment to see if more than, 10 people would show in the same venues. And it was changed the world. It was a huge success.
So
raised the money, did everything.
So the tents in,
Bryant Park.
Yeah, the tents. How did it technically become Bryant Park and the tents? And what was that?
Well, the first season that we decided to try to organize something, we did it at the Macklowe Hotel, which was on 44th Street.
That's right.
It was Harry Macklowe.
I remember that, yeah.
And he was reading articles that we had put, that were in the press about trying to organize shows after. Because not only was there this Disaster Michael show, the next season Isaac had a show in Soho in a loft at 8 o'clock at night. 1,500 people sitting in seats, or 1,200 people who wouldn't budge, and the power blew.
Yeah.
And people sitting there in the pitch black with cigarette lighters and waiting for backup generators. I don't know, Donna, somebody was having a show on 557th Avenue in their showroom, and the freight elevators broke down. And Liz Tilberis, and people had to be carried out by the fire department. Right. I mean, it was just one disaster after another.
Right.
So we had a real reason to get this organized. Bryant Park was under renovation at the time. It was Needle Park. It was disgusting, but it was being reinvented. Stan Herman, who became president of CFDA after I was hired, he said, okay, I could work with her. Nobody wanted to be president. He said, I'll do it. And so we were, Mutt and Jeff for 10 years.
Oh, my God, that's right.
And he was on the board at Bryant Park, and his office is on 40th Street and 6th Avenue, and we negotiated with them because it was like the backyard of the garment industry.
Yeah.
And it was perfect. And I remember, I mean, the biggest part was raising the money to do it because the fashion industry wasn't going to spend the money. Designers might be successful, but not spending a lot of money on the shows if they don't have to. And I spent several weeks dialing for dollars. The first person who actually came on board was Evian Water, through a friend of mine who's one of the publishers, said, I know this man, Mark Rodriguez, and he's just taken over at Evian. They're looking for a way to do something clever in America.
Yeah.
You know, this before there were 15 waters on the shelves. And Evian came on board, and I think we just agreed, I had no idea, for $100,000. Then I called Anna Wintour, and literally it was on a phone call, explaining the whole concept, what we're doing, and would they be funded. And she said, how much you need? And I said, $500,000. Really had no idea. And she said, let me get back to you, I'll call Cy. And, you know, literally, I think the next day or later that day, she called back and said, we'll give you $100,000. So I said, I'll take it. Maybe that was the first time we had the 100, then we made that the benchmark.
Yeah.
I then called the president of Hearst, and I said, Vogue is giving us $100,000. He said, okay, Harper's will give you $100,000. Then I called David Pecker, was the president of Hachette, and I said, Vogue and Bazaar are doing this. And he said, okay, Elle will give you $100,000. And then I called friends I knew at Clairol and said, you know, you're America's hair brand. I was trying to find companies that had relevance to the industry. Yeah. And Jane Hertzmark, who had worked for me for 6 years when I started PR, I was now at Prescriptives. She had gone back to business school at Columbia and then went to work at Lauder. So I said, Janie, this is perfect. You're a young, cool brand. You know, let's do this. Yeah. And she was able to get $100,000 and Prescriptives was the sponsor. And she at the time was training Aaron Lauder to be in the business. Aaron was our point person. And then literally, Michael Moore inside of me called General Motors and said, can I speak to the president? And, you know, if you just ask sometimes stupidly, you go right through. I know. Now I'd be afraid to do it. Then I had no problem.
Yeah, it's amazing. Sometimes it's ignorance is bliss.
Absolutely. So they sent me right through and spoke to the president's secretary, and she said, this is a great idea. Could you send us some materials? And I sent her stuff, and then I eventually had a great conversation with, I don't remember his name for love or money, and I guess it was David Pecker who was at Elle. They published all the car and driver magazines, and so they had a lot of chits in Detroit. He said, I'll follow up on that and get it for you.
Nice.
And he did. And, you know, you just, everybody helped out. We had enough money and created the first season, which was in the fall of 1993, of 7th on 6th. And I said to sponsors at that time, just give me a logo. We're going to make a sign this big. If you want to give something out, we have Metro shelves, and give me a box of something that we'll keep replenishing.
Right.
You know, we know how that eventually grew into sponsor lounges and branding and what have you, but it was, who knew if it would work?
What about the city? How was it working with the city to set that up?
It was interesting. It was, Dinkins was mayor at the time.
That's right.
And I remember having meeting, going up to Gracie Mansion when this was being formulated. And we sat and waited for him. He came in his tennis whites. He'd been playing tennis. And I explained what we wanted to do and needed help from the city and how important the garment industry and the apparel industry was to New York. And he said, yeah, but, you know, so is education, and so is this, and so is that. And if we start funding you and giving you, you know, then we have to do this for everybody. I mean, it was kind of obnoxious. And so I said to him, well, I guess we'll just have to take up that offer about the Meadowlands. And he said, what, are you threatening to go to New Jersey? And I said, well, it's the only way that anybody gets your attention. Because they were giving money to everybody who threatened to move their business out of New York. And people looked at me like, you really just said that to the mayor? And I mean, had nothing to lose. And they didn't give us any help, but they wound up making it a little bit easier with certain agencies for permitting and street permits and banners and things like that. And even at the opening kickoff, it was his wife, Joyce Dinkins, was there cutting the ribbon with the designers. So I was never a huge fan of Mr. Dinkins, unfortunately, because of that. But we started with two tents. One where the restaurant is now, and that was called Gertrude. Mm-hmm. And it was called Gertrude because there's a statue of Gertrude Stein in the park that prominently situated backstage. Yeah. And designers would put hats and beads and everything on her. So we called her Gertrude. The front tent was on the other side of the lawn, and it's the Elizabeth Shaw Lowell fountain, which jutted into the last few rows of the tent. We had to design the tent, cutting out space for the fountain. So we called her Josephine, I'm sorry. And then we had a third venue in the library, which was the Celeste Bartos Forum. So it was Celeste, Gertrude, and what did I just say? Elizabeth Shaw Lowell fountain. And I said, these were our three muses. And I had my friends at Pentagram, who Michael Beirut did the graphics for us of the logo of 7th on 6th.
That was so great.
He used to work for the Vignellis, and I met him through my IDC days. Yeah. So anyway, it was 18 years I ran it. We sold it after 10 years to IMG. And then I started going to fashion weeks around the world, creating them in Bombay and helping them get it going in Berlin and buying Fashion Week in Moscow and in Australia. And just, it's fascinating.
I think one of the takeaways in this conversation is how those moments, the times in people's lives when shit happens are so critically important to growth. And you're like a perfect example of it. And even after the tents and all of that, I mean, you already did it. I know, when I left,
people thought, like, what's going to happen? She's going to disappear and die.
No, you already did everything a human being would be happy to do. And then it was like, well, what is she going to do? And there was no question in my mind. I mean, I even told you that I can't wait to see what you're going to do next. Your ability to, your Rolodexes in your head to connect people and to see opportunities where people don't see them. I mean, that is your real skill set. You see shit that nobody else can see. And I find it amazing. And I just think that knowing more about you and the way you've transversed through your life is such a great lesson for women, especially. You're not one of these women's lib, right? People who is like this, and this. You like do your
just
shit.
Do it.
But I'm doing it. I'm living it. I'm living the dream of a woman. And I have one last question. Marty's granddaughter is named Eloise. She's 6 years old, and I interviewed her for Instagram, and I asked her when she is older and gets married and has a kid, and she said, I'm not getting married, and I don't want children. I have things I want to do, and I will not have time to have a family and kids.
Oh, my God.
And I thought, I know I did not influence this girl. I don't know her that well, but, like, where is this coming from?
Oh, my God.
Then I thought, when I was 6, I remember somebody asked me that, and I said something similar, and they were angry at me. They really, really were angry, and I said, okay, I'm going to modify it. I'm going to change it. And say someday I will, and the ultimate kind of expression of a person and who they are and what they do, especially for a woman, doesn't necessarily connect to being Mrs. Someone.
Right.
And some of us are not meant to, for whatever the reasons are, aren't meant to be Mrs. Someone. And I think you too. I mean, and I had this conversation with Anna also. Yeah. But I mean, like you're your own.
I wish I had made time to be not necessarily Mrs. Someone, but to have that other aspect of my life. I mean, that is you can't have it all sometimes.
Well,
but then some people do. God bless them.
So I'm sharing this. At 65, I met Marty.
Which is incredible.
Okay, so I'm just saying, You never
Hope
know
springs
it.
eternal.
You never know.
You never know.
You never know. And I think if you really are thinking about that, you make the time.
I know.
It is a different thing. So I wasn't ready, clearly, until I was 65.
I know, it's incredible.
It is.
But we can't leave without talking quickly about fashion icons and my series at the 92nd Street Y.
My God.
And my next one that's coming up.
Well, tell us.
So this series, as you know, because you kicked it off with me, you were my first
Thank you very much.
guest. And it's been going on for now. I think it's up the 7th year.
It's amazing.
And it's been
amazing.
Everybody that matters. I mean, it's from the Calvin Donna, Tom Ford, Marc Jacobs, Valentino, Victoria Beckham, Leonard Lauder, you name it. But little segue, September 11th, I'm doing Russell Westbrook, the basketball player from Oklahoma, and he's got great style. He has a book coming out with Rizzoli, so that's all time to do this together.
That's very interesting.
And I'm looking forward to that.
I'm
already getting friends, people who usually come are now, my husband wants to come to this one.
I was going to say, this is going to change the
My
demographic.
kids are going crazy.
That's
so
very
there'll be
exciting.
a lot of men in the audience.
Well, which will be great. I think it's a good way to kind of, everything is sort of crossing roads now.
Yeah, it is culturally just a weave and a tapestry, and I'm happy to, I love sharing, like with you today, getting other people to find out who are they? How did they become that? What turned you on? When, I don't care about that collection and this collection. How did you become the people you are?
For me, my curiosity is about fitness, health, beauty, style, and women, and sort of the empowering women through all of these things. And what is your story? What happened to you? Like, you were born into a house where your dad was in the garment industry.
And my mother was Martha Stewart before there was a Martha Stewart.
So there you go. So
she did everything.
It's done. It's done. It's there. That's it. And so you know so much from the beginning, but it's so helpful to know the beginning. I love you.
I love you too, darling.
We have more and more events to share with each other.
I hope so.
You also asked me to be in the first of the shows at the tent.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, absolutely. And that got you to show in Miami at the swim
right.
shows.
You did.
You are always going to be in anything I do.
And I met Etta James from doing that show because I used all her music, and we became very good friends. And that was one of the best.
Perfect.
Yeah, that was such a great part of my life, having our friendship. Anyway, I'm happy that you Thank you so much. The conversation with Fern was absolutely fantastic. I'm sure you guys got a lot out of it. I certainly did, just by refreshing my memory of everything she's done. Thanks for checking in.